Emily glanced out of the frosted kitchen window, the soft glow of the morning sun casting long shadows on the snow-dusted ground. Her son, Daniel, sat at the table, toying with his cereal, his small face clouded with worry. "Mom," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Please don't make me go to church today." The words struck Emily like a sudden chill. Daniel loved Sunday mornings, the hymns, the warm greetings from the congregation, and the sermons by Pastor Caleb, a man she had always trusted. "Why not, honey?" Emily asked, crouching beside him, trying to catch his gaze. But Daniel's eyes remained fixed on the swirling milk in his bowl. I don't like it anymore," he mumbled. The unease in Daniel's voice planted the first seed of doubt in Emily's heart. It wasn't like him to be so evasive. As she pondered his words, her phone buzzed on the counter. A text from her neighbor, Laura, caught her attention. "Have you noticed anything strange about Pastor Caleb lately?" The question sent a shiver down her spine. Strange? Caleb had been a pillar of their community for years, a beacon of faith and guidance. What could Laura mean? The day unfolded in its usual routine, but Emily couldn't shake the nagging sense of something amiss. Daniel avoided her gaze all morning, and even Lily, her bubbly 6-year-old daughter, seemed quieter than usual. When the family finally arrived at the church, the grand wooden doors loomed larger than ever, casting an ominous shadow. Inside, the sanctuary felt colder, despite the soft hum of the heating system. The stained glass windows, which usually radiated warmth and comfort, seemed darker, as if the colors had dulled. Pastor Caleb stood at the pulpit, his presence commanding as always. But Emily couldn't help noticing the way his hands trembled slightly as he turned the pages of his Bible. His voice, while steady, carried an unfamiliar edge. The congregation sat in rapt silence, but Emily's mind raced. Was it just her imagination, or was there something different about him? After the service, Emily lingered, her eyes trailing Pastor Caleb as he retreated into his office. She was about to follow when Laura appeared by her side. "Emily?" Laura whispered, her voice laced with urgency. "I need to talk to you." They stepped into the quiet corridor, away from prying ears. Laura's face was pale, her usual composure replaced with visible anxiety. "I don't know how to say this," she began, wringing her hands, "but I've heard things. Late-night meetings at the church, strange lights coming from his office, and there's this chant." Her voice broke as she glanced nervously over her shoulder. "I thought I was imagining it, but others have seen it too." Emily felt a cold dread settle over her. She wanted to dismiss Laura's words as baseless rumors, but they aligned eerily with her own observations. That night, as she tucked Daniel into bed, she pressed him gently, hoping to ease his fears. "Sweetie, what is it about church that makes you so scared?" she asked. Daniel hesitated, his small hands clutching the edge of his blanket. "It's the pastor," he finally said, his voice trembling. "He does things. I saw him in the basement one night. There were candles and a glowing box. He told me not to tell anyone." Tears welled up in his eyes. "Mom, I don't want to go back." Emily's heart raced as she sat alone in the living room later that night. Daniel's words replayed in her mind, each detail more unsettling than the last. She thought of the glowing box, the candles, the chant Laura had mentioned. The pieces didn't fit, but they painted a picture she couldn't ignore. Deciding she needed answers, Emily resolved to follow Pastor Caleb the next evening. She would find out what was happening, for Daniel's sake, for her family. As she locked the doors and turned off the lights, a chilling thought crossed her mind. What if I discover something I'm not ready to face? Emily sat in her car under the cover of darkness, parked discreetly across the street from the church. The faint hum of the heater filled the silence as her eyes remained fixed on the glowing windows of Pastor Caleb's office. Each passing second felt heavier, her heartbeat syncing with the rhythmic tapping of her fingers on the steering wheel. What was she hoping to see? Or rather, what was she afraid she might uncover? The church seemed empty, its grand silhouette stark against the moonlit sky. Yet a faint, almost otherworldly glow emanated from the pastor's office window. Emily's stomach churned with unease. She was about to step out of the car when a shadow moved across the curtain. Her breath hitched. Someone was inside. Summoning her courage, Emily slipped out of the vehicle, her scarf pulled tightly against the chill. The night air was eerily quiet, save for the faint rustling of leaves. She approached the church cautiously, each step echoing in her ears. As she reached the side entrance, she noticed the door was slightly ajar. A sliver of pale light spilled onto the steps. Why would Caleb leave the door open? She wondered. Inside, The church was a labyrinth of shadows. The familiar warmth of the sanctuary was replaced by an oppressive stillness. Emily's footsteps were muted by the thick carpet as she made her way toward the source of the light. The faint hum of voices reached her ears, low, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. She froze, her mind racing. Was someone chanting? The corridor leading to Caleb's office seemed endless, the sound of her heartbeat growing louder with each step. As she neared the door, she peered through the crack and saw Caleb hunched over his desk, a strange, glowing object in front of him. The room was bathed in an ethereal light, casting eerie shadows on the walls. Candles flickered around him, their flames unnaturally steady. Emily strained to hear the words he was muttering, but they were in a language she didn't recognize. Latin? Greek? She couldn't be sure. Suddenly, Caleb looked up, his eyes locking onto the door. Emily recoiled, her heart pounding. Had he seen her? She pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath as the door creaked open. But instead of Caleb stepping out, another figure emerged. A woman Emily recognized as Sarah, a longtime member of the congregation. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She clutched a piece of paper tightly, her hands trembling. As she passed Emily without noticing her, Emily caught a glimpse of what was written. Symbols and markings that looked like some kind of ritual. Emily waited until the hallway was clear before slipping into the office. The air was thick with the scent of burning wax and something metallic. Her eyes were drawn to the glowing object on the desk. A box, intricately carved with symbols that seemed to pulse faintly. She reached out to touch it but pulled back as the temperature around it seemed to drop. "What are you doing here?" Caleb's voice boomed behind her, making her jump. She turned to see him standing in the doorway, his face unreadable. I was just..." Emily stammered, searching for an excuse, but Caleb's eyes narrowed, his expression shifting from surprise to something darker. "You shouldn't be here," he said coldly, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. The tension was palpable as Caleb moved closer. "This isn't what you think," he said, his tone defensive. "Then what is it?" Emily shot back, her voice trembling. Caleb hesitated, his gaze darting toward the box. "It's a relic, something I've been studying. It's harmless." Emily didn't believe him. The unease she'd felt all week now boiled over into fear. "Daniel saw you," she blurted out, "in the basement, with this thing. What are you hiding, Caleb?" His expression darkened further. "Daniel shouldn't have been there," he said sharply. "He doesn't understand." Emily's chest tightened. "Understand what? That you're performing rituals in the middle of the night? That you're scaring people?" Her voice cracked with anger and desperation. "What are you doing to my family?" Before Caleb could respond, a loud crash echoed from the sanctuary. Both of them turned toward the sound, their faces mirroring the same shock. "Stay here," Caleb ordered, but Emily wasn't about to listen. She followed him down the corridor, her instincts screaming that something was horribly wrong. The sanctuary was in disarray. Pews were overturned, and the grand chandelier above swayed ominously. At the center of the chaos stood Daniel, his small frame silhouetted against the flickering candlelight. His hands were outstretched, his eyes wide with terror. Opposite him was a figure Emily didn't recognize. A tall man cloaked in black, his face obscured by shadows. "Get away from him!" Emily screamed, rushing toward her son. The cloaked figure turned, revealing piercing, otherworldly eyes that seemed to bore into her soul. "He belongs to us now," the figure said in a voice that wasn't entirely human. Emily shielded Daniel, her maternal instincts taking over. "You won't touch him," she shouted, her voice trembling but resolute. Caleb stepped forward, holding the box tightly. "You've gone too far," he said to the figure. "This wasn't part of the agreement." Emily's head spun. "Agreement? What agreement?" The figure laughed, a low, guttural sound that sent chills down her spine. "You think you can stop this now?" it taunted. "It's already begun." As the figure raised a hand, the candles flared brighter, their flames turning an unnatural blue. Emily clutched Daniel tightly, her mind racing for a way out. "Caleb, what is this?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "What have you done?" "I was trying to help," Caleb said, his voice strained. "The box? It was supposed to protect us. To protect the church." Emily's anger flared. "Protect us? From what? You've brought this into our lives." Before Caleb could respond, the figure lunged toward them, its movements unnaturally fast. Emily closed her eyes, bracing for the worst, but a sudden burst of light filled the room. When she opened her eyes, the figure was gone, and Caleb lay on the ground, the box shattered beside him. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily's hands shook as she helped Daniel to his feet. "It's over," Caleb said weakly, his voice barely audible. But Emily wasn't so sure. The shattered remains of the box still pulsed faintly, as if the darkness it held wasn't entirely gone. "This isn't over," she whispered, holding Daniel close. "Not by a long shot. The best was yet to come." The shattered remains of the box still pulsed faintly on the cold stone floor of the sanctuary. Emily stood frozen, her arms wrapped protectively around Daniel. The faint blue glow from the remnants cast eerie shadows on the walls. Caleb struggled to his feet, his face pale and etched with exhaustion. "This isn't over," Emily whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. Her eyes darted toward the darkened corners of the sanctuary, half expecting the figure to reappear. "What was that thing, Caleb? And what have you done to my family?" Caleb leaned against the altar for support, his breathing ragged. "It's not what you think," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "I tried to save us. The relic. It was supposed to be a barrier, a shield against the darkness. But I didn't understand its power." Emily's anger boiled over. "You didn't understand, and yet you brought this thing into our lives? You involved my son in your mess." Her voice cracked, tears streaming down her face. "What gave you the right?" Caleb flinched at her words but didn't look away. "I didn't know it would call them," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I thought I could control it. Protect the church, the town, everyone." "Protect us from what?" Emily demanded, her voice sharp and unyielding. "You're not making sense." From behind them, Daniel spoke softly, his small voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "It's not over," he said, his eyes fixed on the glowing shards. Emily turned to him, her heart sinking. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "They're still here," Daniel whispered, pointing toward the far corner of the room. Emily followed his gaze, and her blood ran cold. The shadows seemed to ripple unnaturally, and a faint, guttural growl echoed through the sanctuary. The air grew heavier, oppressive, as if the darkness itself were alive. Caleb stepped forward, his expression stealing with resolve. "Emily, take Daniel and leave. Now," he ordered. But Emily didn't move. "Not without knowing the truth," she said, her voice firm despite the terror coursing through her veins. "What did you do, Caleb? What is this thing?" Caleb hesitated, then spoke quickly, his words tumbling over each other. "The relic. It was a seal to keep the darkness contained. I found it years ago during a mission trip and brought it here, thinking it could strengthen our faith. But when the seal weakened, they came. I thought I could bargain with them, keep them at bay. But they wanted more. They wanted Daniel," Emily finished for him, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "They wanted my son." The growl grew louder, more guttural, as the shadows in the corner began to take shape. A dark, humanoid figure emerged, its features obscured but its presence radiating malice. Emily's grip on Daniel tightened, her protective instincts flaring. "You won't have him," she spat, stepping between the creature and her son. The figure laughed, a deep, chilling sound that reverberated through the room. "You think you can stop us?" it taunted, its voice resonating with an inhuman echo. "The child belongs to us. He was promised." Emily glanced at Caleb, her eyes blazing with fury. "Promised? By who?" Before Caleb could answer, the figure lunged, its movements unnaturally fast. Emily screamed, shielding Daniel as the creature closed in. But before it could reach them, Caleb stepped forward, clutching a tattered Bible in one hand and a small vial of liquid in the other. "Not today," Caleb growled, his voice filled with a renewed strength. He flung the liquid at the creature, and it recoiled with an ear-piercing screech. The shadows around it writhed and dissipated, and the blue glow of the relic's remains began to dim. The creature snarled, its form flickering as if it were struggling to maintain its shape. "This isn't the end," it hissed before vanishing into the darkness. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily collapsed to her knees, holding Daniel tightly as tears streamed down her face. Caleb stood motionless, his shoulders sagging with exhaustion. "It's gone," he said finally, his voice hollow. "But not forever." Emily looked up at him, her eyes blazing with determination. "Then we'll be ready." This was the truth she had uncovered. A battle not just for her son, but for their very souls. And while the danger had passed for now, she knew this was only the beginning. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Emily's home, a sharp contrast to the darkness that had engulfed her the night before. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, watching Daniel and Lily play in the yard. The sound of their laughter brought tears to her eyes, tears of relief and gratitude. The events of the previous night still lingered in her mind, vivid and haunting. Caleb had explained everything before leaving town. The relic, the bargain, and the darkness he had unintentionally unleashed. Emily hadn't forgiven him, but she saw the torment in his eyes. He had lost himself trying to protect others, a reminder of how fear could cloud even the best intentions. As she reflected, Emily felt a deep resolve settle within her. The shadows weren't gone entirely, but she had faced them and won, at least for now. The love for her children had given her the courage to stand against unimaginable forces, and that love would continue to guide her, no matter what lay ahead. The lessons were clear. Trust your instincts, fight for what matters, and never let fear dictate your actions. Emily knew she couldn't rely on others to protect her family. Not Caleb, not the church, not anyone. But she also knew she wasn't alone. Daniel had shown incredible bravery, and Lily's innocence reminded her of what they were fighting for. Together, they were stronger than any darkness. Later that evening, as Emily tucked Daniel into bed, she paused to stroke his hair. "You were so brave, sweetheart," she said softly. "I'm so proud of you." Daniel looked up at her, his wide eyes filled with a quiet understanding far beyond his years. "I wasn't brave, Mom. I was scared the whole time." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with love. "That's what makes you brave. Being scared but doing the right thing anyway." The house was quiet as Emily walked to her room, the faint hum of the wind outside a comforting reminder of the world's normalcy. She knew the battle wasn't over, but for the first time in days, she felt a sense of peace. They had survived. They had faced the darkness and emerged stronger. As she turned off the light, Emily whispered a silent prayer. Not just for her family's safety, but for the strength to face whatever came next. The best was truly yet to come. This story reminds us of the incredible strength found in love and courage. Emily's journey shows that even in the face of darkness, a mother's protective instinct and a family's unity can prevail. The challenges we face may seem overwhelming, but they can also reveal the resilience we never knew we had. What would you do if faced with unimaginable darkness? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage and resilience. Comment the word brave if you'd stand with Emily against the shadows.